Welcome everybody to Physis and the Polis. I'm Jeffrey Bernstein. I'm going to be chairing and commenting on Samuel's and Carl's papers. What we'll do is we'll have Samuel go first and Carl go second. I will, if we need to, I will send a private chat for, a 5-minute warning, and then I will do a short commentary on them, and then we'll have a question and answer period. So at this point, let me introduce Samuel Lee from the New School for Social Research, who will speak to us about the hidden connections between Physis and nomos on Carl Schmitt's Nomos of the Earth. Take it away, Samuel.
All right, thank you, Jeffrey, thank you. And I'm so glad to be here to present my paper. And let's share my little PowerPoint so that you can at least have something to read about the quotation. And yeah, I'm so honored and glad to be here to present my ideas, and I'm looking forward to discuss with you all about how we find Carl Schmitt's ideas. So my topic is the hidden connection between Physis and nomos on Carl Schmitt's Nomos of the Earth. Contemporary legal philosophy typically divides into two camps: natural law theory and legal positivism. Lon Fuller and John Finnis exemplify the former, while the latter are represented by Hans Kelsen, H.L.A. Hart, and J.L. Austin, regardless of their disagreement with each other. One of the differences between two camps rests on the understanding of nature, with related to the source of legality. For natural law theories, nature realizes the divine will or illustrates the order of reason. Hence, this worldview provides normative ground for all human laws and norms, given that they are analogous to the natural order. On the other side, legal positivists denies all kinds of theological arguments. The legality should rather ground on the procedure of lawmaking. Nature plays no role in the legal order. At most, the natural world delivers a model of mechanical world for human beings to imitate and study, but the nature itself contains no prescription that guides human beings' behavior. In this paper, my primary aim is to argue that Schmitt's concrete order thinking embodies an alternative way of thinking about nature in the legal theory, endorsing not the Humean fact-value dichotomy. He is dedicated to derive the normative power of norms from the soil, or more precisely, the interaction with the material world. The surrounding world, or world, that contains physical and virtual entities and mediated by language, culture, and myths, determines the political and legal realms. That is so-called the concrete order. What Schmitt is doing is to question any transcendental concept of nature that is taken for granted. The soil is never an empty space for man to inhabit. On the contrary, the land is always already filled with meanings and disclosed through the interaction with inhabitants. The social and economic activities that take place on the definite land determines the norms and orders within which the social, legal, and political structures are established upon it. To be fair, thinkers in the same school often treat the ideas of nature differently. After all, the meaning of nature itself varies over time. As an umbrella concept, it's subject to all kinds of interpretation and revisions. Hence, to ease the analysis, I just handpick a figure from each school to illuminate the basic disagreement first. Regarding legal positivism, the role of nature is almost absent in legal validity. Hans Kelsen, for example, argues that legal rules are the prescription for the behaviors of man. Thus, unlike the laws of natural science, they can be viewed as norms that command and have room for exceptions. In General Theory of Law and States, that published in 1945, he claims that the validity of legal norms is determined by the degree to which legal norms are binding in the society. While most of the norms are effectively made and executed, the validity of legal norms is guaranteed. No doubt, Carson questions the theological basis of natural law theory and draws attention to the factual condition of the validity of norms. For him, I quote, "Since norms regulate human behavior, and human behavior takes place in time and space, norms are valid for a certain time and for a certain space." End of quote. So contrary to the universality of the natural law theory, Carson particularly concerns the spatial temporal elements that limits the validity of norm. For example, Swiss law have no normative power to French citizens in France. He elaborated carefully in the Pure Theory of Laws published in 1960 that the legal order, as a kind of social order, shall use sanction to motivate or restrain some detrimental behaviors from individuals from a psychological, sociological perspective. Different place and time would adopt different legal means to shape the behavior of people, just like other kinds of social order work. Noticeably, what nature as an immediate given relates to the early foundation of the rule of law is, for Carson, mostly on the idea of causality. Parallel to the law of nature, the rule of law, I quote, connects two facts with one another as condition and consequence, end of quote. The mechanical structures generally manifest the idea of causality, which is similar to the function of retributive legal system that Carson claims in a retrospective way. At this point, social order is, I quote, the order of nature, end of quote, which sounds surprisingly close to the natural law theory. But still, this overlap between the social and natural order is an early transitional stage. Later on, the validity of norms depends not on the natural order, but the basic norms along with the legitimate lawmaking procedures. Meanwhile, some contemporary natural law philosophers, like John Physis, devote themselves to save the natural law theory in a critical way. Most of them, if not all, critically inherit the theoretical resources by rejecting the dogmatic elements involved. Physis, for example, reinterprets Thomas' thought to make it fit in the liberal secular framework of legal debate. In Summa Theologica, Aquinas defines the natural law as, I quote, the participation in the eternal law by rational creatures, end of quote. Physis explains that the participation that Aquinas mentions implies the correspondence between the order of the precept of the natural law and the order of the natural incarnation. Natural law theory entails that all men are endowed with the natural tendency to seek for goods and related to their rational nature. Most importantly, Physis is fully aware of the intimate relationship between the natural law and the intrinsic goods, given that the natural law embodies the genuine sense of reason. Charles Covell eloquently explains that Physis' theory, I quote, grounded the principle of natural law upon a set of fundamental values or practical principles, which disclose the basic forms of human flourishing that were to be grasped and pursued as intrinsic goods. These intrinsic goods include bodily health, knowledge, play, sociability, practical reasonableness, and religion. Collectively, a thriving life is generally constituted by these elements that are rational and universal. I quote, the basic human goods and values, which constitute these first principles of natural law, were themselves self-evident and are derived principles of practical reason, end of quote. This is how Physis revives the idea of natural law by secularizing Thomas' natural law theory without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. To put it in a nutshell, both John Physis and Hans Kelsen conceive nature as a causal mechanical world that embodies reason. While Physis derived the set of intrinsic goods from the natural world, Kelsen rejects its normative implication in terms of lawmaking. Still, both of them fail to recognize the seemingly uncontested presupposition of the understanding of nature, namely, nature as primary rational, physical, and mechanical, is culturally mediated. I will argue that Carl Schmitt, a well-trained legalist and a philosopher, is aware of the mediation of nature and its meaning. A lack of further reflection makes this quasi-scientific worldview dogmatic. As a result, Schmitt develops an alternative approach to reconceive the relationship between nature and legal order, physis and nomos, through the concrete order thinking. First and foremost, Schmitt argues that instead of adopting the Germanized word Pflicht, the Greek word nomos can restore the primary meaning of laws, which is land orientation. I quote, "Every fundamental order is a spatial order. One speaks of the constitution of a country or a piece of earth as of its fundamental order, its nomos," Schmitt claims. End of quote. In the field of jurisprudence, the phrase Pflicht order or legal order is generally accepted as a common expression in the sense that Pflicht can be conceived as law, decision, or order. It seems to imply that the legal order is merely an aggregation of rules and statutes. Order is nothing more than an epitome of legal rules. Hence, a whole set of laws is equivalent to the order, which is why the term legal order puts law and order together. But a resounding no would be Schmitt's response to this view. For him, order is far more fundamental than the law. The social and cultural orders actualize the form of nomos and provide with legitimacy and validity. I quote, "The norms or rules does not create the order. On the contrary, only on the basis and in the framework of a given order does it have a certain regulating functions with a regularly small degree of validity, independent of the facts of the case." End of quote. In short, order determines the laws and the rule by law. Some great minds like Pindar would put it as law is king, nomos basilis, in the sense that the legal law is the highest authority of the political body. For Schmitt, however, nomos is king due not only to the power of sanction that the law embodies. Nomos is superior in the hierarchy of rule also because it represents the concrete order with which all laws are merely the derivatives of it. I quote, "There does not exist a free-floating jurisprudence any more than there exists a free-floating intelligentsia. Legal and jurisprudent thought expresses itself only in connection to a historical, concrete, total order." End of quote. Schmitt strongly insists. In the appendix of the Nomos of the Earth in the international law of the Jus Publicum Europaeum, published in 1950, Schmitt further provides an in-depth philosophical analysis on the ground of legal order, particularly the relationship between nomos and physis. Etymologically speaking, the Greek root of the noun nomos is the verb nemai. As the noun, I quote, indicates the action as a process whose content is defined by the verb, which is also known as nomen actionis. Schmitt suggests that there are at least three different but related activities that nemai and so as nomos imply, namely appropriation, distribution, or division, and production. To begin with, to take or to appropriate is the first meaning of nemai. Even in the case of Old English, nemen means to seize or to take. Thus, nomos means land appropriation. The second meaning is to divide or to distribute. Schmitt claims it is a common understanding among legal scholars such as Thomas Hobbes. The last one is Sweden, which is pasturage. Nomos is about production and manufacturing goods. Nema is to use, to produce, to run a household, etc. These three important social and economic activities namely appropriation, distribution, and production, between the living people and the land, cultivates the meaning of their own will. Nomos is merely the product of the social order. The interaction with the land determines every stage of history, as much as the development of all these orders. As William Hooker argues at this point, I quote, "The land is not only man's natural habitat, but also offers the physical and ontological fixity to create meaningful order." Schmitt adopts the tripartite structure of nomos to show that nomos is a unity of land with a definite orientation. I quote, "Nomos is the measure by which the land in a particular order is defined and situated. It is also the form of political, social, religious order determined by this process." End of quote. As if a wall separates inside and outside, nomos divide and isolate the orientation within the boundary. This wall-like order determines the identity of the people in different communities or social groups. Legality, then, is grounded on this kind of concrete order. Nomocracy is a prototype of all political orders. Eventually, how is Schmitt's notion of nature different from the two camps I've mentioned? Concerning Physis, there are at least two levels, I suggest, that are worth scrutinizing. The first level unfolds a particular kind of orientation of the space that Schmitt writes extensively, namely the Christian-based nomocracy that defines the European community. In another book, Dialogues on Power and Space, published in 1958, Schmitt expresses the biblical grounds more explicitly. I quote, "The Bible," he claims, "is concerned from beginning to end with the opposition between land and sea." End of quote. More specifically, he explains that God allows the dry lands to people to dwell in the Genesis. The sea he pressed back creates the boundary of the dwelling place. This boundary determines the line between standing danger and the living space. As the former manifests, I quote, "an uncanny monstrosity at Leviathan." End of quote. The international law that emerged from the modern Europe is closely related to the Christianized nomos of Europe, which were once the Christian friends enemy distinction, and then the secularized theological consensus of persona publica. Mutually recognizing each other's political state as equal and civilized moral persons was a distinguishing feature of a well-functioning world system. In the second level, nomocracy provides a meta-ontological account of how different conceptions of nature are formed. This level also gives a transcultural framework that makes the formation of incompatible understanding of nomos and Physis intelligible. The transcultural dimension is also free from the Eurocentric imagination of nature and the polis. Provided that the activity of land appropriation of the people produce and reproduce the cultural and social life that determines people's view of nature, the Greco-Roman Christian worldview is merely one among many other possibilities. Taoism, for example, in the Chinese-speaking world, is somehow formed by different social and economic way of inhabitation that constitute a completely different concept of nature, as well as its physical, biological, social, and cultural implications. Schmitt thus adopted a term, crossroom, to grasp the proximity of people within the same orientation of the political body, which also echoes with his earlier concept of the political pluriverse. Unlike plurality that the liberal widely endorsed, pluriverse implies the conflict between different universes or incompatible worldviews developed from the different patterns of nomos and Physis, resulted in the different orientation of the land. To sum up, Carl Schmitt's doctrine of concrete order thinking refuse to follow the conventional understanding of nature that natural law theory and legal positivism presuppose, without any further reflecting on this basis. Schmitt's approach of nomocracy shows how the rational mechanical belief of nature is mediated by European language, myth, and culture. To look for a more fundamental comprehension, Schmitt introduced the concrete order thinking as a new way to rethink the meaning of nature. The social and economic activity of people in a territory develops a definite social and cultural life, which causes the nature to manifest itself to us in a certain way. At the same time, Schmitt acknowledged the incompatibility between these philosophies of nature, as well as the social and political implication of these conflicts. Pluriverse, for him, is the phenomenon of politics and legal system. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samuel. Excellent job. Now we turn to Karl von der Luft from St. John's. Is it in Santa Fe or Annapolis?
Santa Fe, that's right.
Santa Fe, very good. Who will speak to us about Physis and the politics and the political in Heidegger and Strauss. It's all yours, Karl. For question and answers, since I can't see any of you, perhaps the best way to do it is just to announce yourself on Zoom and then ask your question. But I'll give my short commentary to these wonderful papers, and then we can get to question and answers, if that's okay with everybody. So if nature or Physis is, according to Heraclitus, that which hides, this is so in a number of senses. We never see the process of growing in living beings. That process doesn't happen at the level of representation. We never see with the physical eye the essence or form of physical things. That too is not given to representation. We never see the physical stuff out of which things are made, other than by means of the forms that accompany this stuff when it's already made. Prime matter as well is not given to representation. And finally, we never encounter nature as separate from the various things that are said to determine it: God, reason, law, etc. That is, nature as the subsidiary or middle term of a process of instantiation is never given to representation. This is perhaps a reason that nature has fascinated and perplexed thinkers from the ancient Greeks to our own day. The two papers here register the difficulties of incorporating nature into conceptions of politics and ethics. For Samuel Lee, nature or Physis plays a compellingly provocative role in Carl Schmitt's conception of concrete world order. Schmitt attempts to cash out the relation of nature or Physis to concrete order or nomos in a manner that is at once deeper and more concrete than most ontological conceptions of nature are. Concrete order designates the meaning and scope of nature in its political character. Nomos, coming from the verb nemein, contains three distinct modalities that crucially involve nature: appropriation, division or distribution, and pasturage or production and manufacturing goods. All three modalities of nomos involve relation to land or soil. Quote, to sum up, there are three vital processes that define nomos's meaning, namely appropriation, distribution, and production. Before establishing the social, legal, and economic orders, people must take, divide, and produce by means of land. The interaction with land determines every stage of history, as much as the development of all these orders, end quote. This philosophical position shows that Schmitt adopts nomos's tripartite structure to show that nomos is a unity of land with a definite orientation, end quote. Nature, in other words, is gathered together and oriented towards humans in a specific way by virtue of nomos. Quote, the surrounding natural world is never neutral to us, end quote. Nature is mediated by words and meanings and joined to the, quote, grander symbolic world in which we dwell, end quote. Physis is, in Lee's formulation, in a hidden connection with nomos. Concrete order only happens in and through nature, just as nature shows itself in and through concrete order. Does this mean, as Schmitt holds in the Nomos of the Earth, that the conception of nature here is prior to ontological determination? Yes, in a sense resonant with Heidegger's. That is, the land is the originary opening for all ontological determinations of nature. In Land and Sea, Schmitt refers to land as an element that points to grand possibilities of the order in which humans live and partake. But it remains the case that nature is what it is as fundamental opening because it is oriented within nomos as concrete order. The land, excuse me, the land, in other words, is what it is because it functions in a specific way for us. On its own, without nomos, the land has no specific quality that renders it oriented. Put differently, without nomos, nature remains hidden. Karl von der Luft explores this conundrum of nature within the context of an examination of Martin Heidegger and Leo Strauss's thought as they relate to the project of natural law, or as Luft formulates it, naturalistic philosophical ethics. For Luft, neither Heidegger nor even Strauss has a conception of nature that is able to do justice to such a philosophical ethics. In Luft's words, quote, key elements of Sein und Zeit and later works involve a commitment to what I will term ontological dispensationalism. This position undermines every philosophical account of nature in general and of the substantive nature of the human being in particular, and thus renders naturalistic philosophical ethics impossible. Strauss's political philosophy can be understood as modifying Heidegger's hermeneutic phenomenology and salvaging a particular idea of nature. This modification has implications for a vindication of natural right as opposed to a vindication of naturalistic philosophical ethics, end quote. The central insight of Luft as concerns Heidegger is that his conception of nature is contingent and historical and therefore limited by something outside of it. Quote, Heidegger is implicitly committed to ontological dispensationalism. In brief, this means that the human being always already understands the world as a coherent whole, that this whole is a finite and historical gift, and that its dynamic origin is essentially mysterious and defies rational account. I understand this position to make philosophical ethics or natural right impossible, end quote. If nature as historical is a gift of being, it is circumscribed, determined, finite, and not self-authorizing. Nature, in other words, is pitched at the ontic level rather than the fundamental ontological level. Quote, it is only in a derivative sense, therefore, that nature could appear as the unchanging natural right of natural law, or the natural right of natural law, end quote. This problem only continues in the later Heidegger. There, the language of ontological gift becomes more explicit, for example, in Schickung and Schicksal, and both nature and norms occur in the open space of this gift. As such, they are always already derivative upon it. While Strauss makes a more valiant return to the discovery of nature, as the Greeks understood it, than Heidegger does, it remains the case that normative situation in which humans find themselves is based upon nature, not as a mode of answering the fundamental questions of life, that is, how should I act, but rather as a mode of the fundamental questions themselves. Quote, Strauss's vindication of nature attains knowledge of the natural situation, which is similarly knowledge of the nature of the human being as a problem. This knowledge amounts to knowledge of ignorance, which serves as the fundamental impulse for all subsequent philosophical questioning. This falls far short of a justification of natural law or philosophical ethics, end quote. Put differently, Strauss inherits from Heidegger the desire to make philosophy questionable again, and in so doing, returns to Socratic ignorance about the answers to fundamental questions. In the end, nature gives us questions, but questions are not answers, and thus cannot provide an ethics, certainly not one based on nature. It strikes me that Lee and Luft are circling around the same fundamental character of nature mentioned at the beginning of my comments, that it hides. For Lee, nature can only serve as the ground for political order insofar as it is taken up by nomos or concrete order and given an orientation. This is perhaps a little closer to the positivism of Hans Kelsen or the natural law theory of John Finnis than Schmitt would have liked, insofar as nature plays a subsidiary, if crucial, role. In any case, nature is formed and informed by nomos. For Luft, nature in Heidegger is a derivative phenomenon consequent upon an ontological gift, which gift is either named being, sein, or appropriation, Ereignis. While Physis for Heidegger is a genuine and authentic name for being, it is just that, one name among many. We might say that it retreats into the ontic realm, which is insufficient for grounding in ethics. Similarly, Strauss shows that at its best, nature is the province of fundamental questions about human being, but is never the province of the answers to those questions. Thus, it too is insufficient for grounding of philosophical ethics. This leads me to wonder whether, despite what the tradition has accorded to nature or Physis as growth, as essence, as matter, there is a darker side to it that needs to be accounted for. Who would not tremble at Strauss's remark to Gershom Scholem in a November 22nd, 1960 letter that, quote, "What you call nothing, the Islamic Aristotelians call Physis, period," end quote. Thank you. And now I think it's time for questions. Again, I'm at my phone, so I can't see who there is. So feel free to just belt out your question and who it's for, and our participants will take it. I have a question for Carl, if no one else has a question first. My question for Carl is, who just generally speaking, who are the candidates for the people that you think have a good naturalistic ethics? This can be either historically or today, but are there candidates who actually solve this problem? Good, thank you.
Yeah, I have a question, Ed Papa. It's directed toward Karl. I don't like this term ontological dispensationalism at all. And the reason is it doesn't really fit Dasein. If it fits anything, it fits Das Man, right? And you never mentioned Das Man, but you could characterize Das Man as an ontological dispensationalism. In other words, it takes its possibilities as given within the social frame, but that's not Dasein. Let me put the point this way. I remember there's an anecdote about Heidegger where he was asked by, I think, a student, well, professor, you finished your theoretical philosophy, and then the next thing you should do is write something in ethics or practical philosophy. And Heidegger was annoyed by that comment, first of all, because it put him in the frame, so to speak, of Das Man, what's a German professor. But I think more profoundly is because the question fails to see the ethical dimension in Heidegger himself, right? The question you pose, I think, is really goes off to the side because you're looking for a metaphysical ethics in a philosophy which attempts to go beyond metaphysics, right? So it's misconceived from the start.
I was just going to ask Samuel a question about how does he think Schmitt, what's the role of freedom in Schmitt, if there is one?
This is a tough question because he seldom mentioned about it. Yeah, the ideas of freedom, because somehow the possibilities that manifest to the person is, especially in the later Schmitt, is a kind of result and the process. When the people are interacting with each other and also interacting with the given physical conditions, and as soon as the technological condition is improving, as soon as the interaction between the human beings are getting more sophisticated and complex, more possibilities are available for the people to choose and to realize, and it actually can allow people to innovate and to break through its own spatial limits, and what Carl Schmitt would call it as a kind of spatial revolution, actually, that brings from the breakthroughs of the technologies and also the material condition. And I think choices or the possibilities that is given by the people in a certain immediacy or in a certain sense of conditions that are available for them is the least meaning of freedom that Schmitt will have in mind, I suppose, because contrary to the earlier writings, that I think Schmitt will have more robust ideas of freedom, especially when he's more influenced by Husserlian or Sayre's ideas of decisionism. Because when he talks about popular sovereignty, when he talks about the constitutional making power, he thinks that the people should, or the sovereign itself, has the absolute freedom to decide what is right or wrong, and there's no more supreme power that is, that can override that decision. So the decision, the political decision of the people as such, is the most highest power, as that you'll be able to witness both in the political and ethical realm in the world. And this is very much influenced by Rousseau. But after the Second World War, Schmitt has a very grand turn, from this decisionism to what he's calling the concrete order thinking, and he strongly emphasized the conditioning of the people's life. Well, what you may claim it as a kind of human condition, and this condition somehow limits people's freedom or the opportunities or the options that people have. But at the same time, the interaction with this kind of condition actually provides the available options for people to choose and people to act, in order to form the nomos or the orders that that establish the social and political order. So in this way, I don't know if I put it correctly, but at least Schmitt has a very great turn in terms of the understanding of freedom from a kind of absolute unhistoricalized ideas of freedom to a sense of should I say phenomenological or hermeneutical ideas of human conditions, that the freedom is at the same time conditioned, but at the same time manifest by the material and also of the technological conditions that people are given in a particular situation. So yeah, that's what I can answer right now.
Are there any other questions for our participants?
So I'll ask a question of people who know far more about this than I do, called an ignorant question to very smart people. The use of nature, kind of to come back to that, especially Samuel Lee, when you're kind of breaking down the types of natural or the natural law versus the legal positivity. I'm curious about this separation of human from nature, and I guess what's the delineation to the unnatural? Because it seems if you're going to say that human beings are existing within the natural world, which I'd certainly say they would, all of the freedoms and capabilities would be inherently natural by virtue of being human, being natural. So either you have to in some way remove the human from what natural is, or call the human actions natural, maybe complexly natural, but still natural actions.
For me, I think that the most important, or maybe one of the most important dimensions, lies on the connection between the ideas of nature and the normativity of whether or not the natural order to provide a prescription to human behavior that people have to, imitate to the natural order or the natural giftedness of the, the ideas or the orientation of how people should be organized, how people should behave in a certain way. It somehow parallels to the natural order, because for the natural law theories, for example, especially the more classical one, they would think that the human orders, natural orders, and the eternal orders are actually very much in the same page. That they're all subjects to the same normative paradigm. So it's very much typically represented by Thomas Aquinas, theological system. But yeah, surely it has a very strong critique in the modernized, secularized age, when people would say that the theological assumption of this kind of imagination of natural order is very much unscientific, and also the normative grounds of the natural order is maybe applicable only to the Christian believer, for example, but it's clearly not, transcultural or very even, Eurocentric and so on. So for the rise of the legal positivism, it actually kind of responds to the flaw of this kind of imagination of natural orders, that nature provides no normative powers to the people. So yes, we are dwelling in the natural world, but at the same time, how we should behave or how our societies should be organized, it depends only on the particular place of people, how they want to, how they want to live, and it's subjected only to the will of those places and those people alone, and it has nothing to do with the natural order, especially because when we say that the natural order or the natural laws allows no spaces for exception, and it has to be constant, and it has the normative power to the people, and these views are strongly rejected by the positivists. That's the natural order simply present or manifest the ideas of causality. That's it, and the causality has nothing to do with normative power or the prescription of people's behavior. So that's why they think that if we want to establish the normative power of our system or the legality of the laws, we have to subject it to somewhere else. For example, the artificial legal order or the law-making procedures that is subjected to the basic norms, as Hans Kelsen's will suggest. So yeah, I'm not sure if I've answered your.
Well, it's interesting because I think they when they're decrying this natural order, they're looking almost at a Newtonian mechanistic worldview as their definition of what natural order is. They're not necessarily looking at, for example, biological natural order or these other things which are a little more fluid in how these behaviors act. And so if you see human beings and human behaviors within the continuity or continuum of how nature itself is, I guess it's hard for me to see exactly where they want to say they're going to run something either parallel to or contravening to natural order, but where that line of distinction is seems very difficult to really highlight.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Folks, it is in the nature of things that they come to an end. I think we should thank our presenters once again for a wonderful presentation. Thank you all for coming. I would say have a good trip back, but you're all at home anyway. Good to see everyone. Thank you again and take care.